Hello, my name's Jack Valentine, and you are watching Ghost of Tsushima review? Okay, so I don't really know what this video is yet. I'm really winging this one here. I've got a general idea of how I want to present what I'm going to present to you today, but wanted to do so in a much more informal manner than I would traditionally do. Basically no script, just a rough rubric of an idea of what I'm going to talk about. So let's just dive right in with what I think about the game in general. Sadly, I think that Ghost of Tsushima is one of the most, if not the most, remarkably unambitious and unimpressive games I've played in 2020. I feel that it was sold on the back of being this Sony PlayStation first party exclusive, and that alone was a seal of quality that the game would supposedly have, and that it certainly does not deliver on. And I think in terms of broad strokes, the final thing I would add is that it's just a little bit upsetting that this would come from a studio that has delivered really fun and genuinely enjoyable titles with the infamous games over the end of the past generation and into the beginning of the PlayStation 4 generation. And while it makes me really happy to see artistic creators having faith put in them to build and create new experiences that aren't these franchised names that are really well recognized or, you know, maybe tied to existing series outside of video games, I just can't shake the feeling that they really missed the mark with this one. So I'm going to stop waffling now and at least try and focus my thoughts a little bit and deliver what you could, I suppose, deem as my review of Ghost of Tsushima. So I went through a legitimate roller coaster of thoughts on this game in just the first few hours alone. Many games critics that had access to pre-release copies of the game kept touting that the opening sequence had absolutely stunning cinematography and gorgeous film-like visuals, and I think that this was just a ripple effect, if you will, of developers Sucker Punch outright saying in pre-release content and marketing material that the game was, in a way, their love letter to the samurai films of Akira Kurosawa. And the game wears this on its sleeve, but not in the ways that it should. I mean, they have a black and white mode in the game that emphasizes the wind physics to try and make the film grain effects on screen look more intense, and they even received the blessing of Kurosawa's estate to call this mode Kurosawa mode. I feel like I've just invented a new TikTok challenge or something, like how many times can you say Kurosawa in 10 seconds? I don't even use TikTok, and maybe that has just been revealed without me telling you this, just by the fact that I tried to make this really bad joke. This was a long walk to say that the word cinematography was thrown around a lot in most forms of critique that were done about this game pre-release. I'm not really going to spend any time talking about this. I had a bit of a rant about it to several friends, and the conclusion we kind of reached was that it just doesn't even feel valuable to talk about the game through this lens, because it's just so far from the media that it's aping and it just doesn't seem worthwhile to try and evaluate it as a product inspired by Kurosawa films. So instead I'm going to try and focus a little bit more, as I said I would earlier and have failed to do so far, on what it is, which is a video game, obviously. So the game is set in the late 13th century on the island of Tsushima and opens with the Mongol invasion of the island. You play as Jin Sakai, a young samurai lord, the youngest and last of his name and family clan, living on the island under his uncle, Lord Shimura. The first immediate wave of impressions that rolled over me with this game were mostly, oh my god, I am not going to like this, because the opening of the game, the beach invasion of the island, is so rigidly written, and while it's supposed to serve as an introduction to the characters and the status quo of certain relationships and obviously things like combat, you're put in this kind of bottleneck hallway where you just have to kill dozens upon dozens of enemies with zero repercussions to yourself. You cannot die in the sequence, or at least I wasn't able to, even though I was getting hit a lot. I hate doing this sort of thing, but I feel like I'm doomed to have to bring up this comparison at some point in this damned video, so I may as well do it now. This, like many other games that have third-person, somewhat timing-based combat with things like deflecting and dodging, are cursed at this point to just end up being compared to Dark Souls or FromSoft games in general by games critics. I just want to come right out and say that it's so absurd to even put them in the same universe. I'm not going to spend any longer on this, to be honest with you, but I will say that when it comes to combat being a core mechanic of a game, such as Ghost of Tsushima or any of the From Software games like Dark Souls, I think that the thought that goes into how you educate a player about how that system works is as vital as the system being well thought out and well designed to begin with. Ghost of Tsushima does not teach you in any kind of interesting manner because it lacks stakes. And on top of that, something that I didn't really know about the game going into it was that it would have quite broad RPG systems, meaning that a lot of what does later improve the combat and start to make it feel more fun and energetic are all locked behind level up walls that you have to play 5+ hours to get to. Ultimately, what it leads to is just hours of me sitting there playing this game thinking, I'm not enjoying this big part of this video game, but I don't know, maybe it will get a bit better in the next couple of hours, and that's just not, it's like if you have a big budget TV show that you've watched 5 to 6 episodes of and just thought were rubbish, but a friend tells you, oh, but you should keep going because it does get good by episode 4 season 2. Do you want to have to commit those extra hours of time just to slog your way through things that you don't even enjoy doing in hopes that it will eventually get good? I am getting ahead of myself a little bit here because I was still talking about that sort of bottleneck opening, so I'll try and circle back to that. So you get through this very linear, ham-fistedly written intro to the game that doesn't set the stage very well. Then you go on several sort of scripted missions, really hand-holdy. There's nothing wrong with that. I really like linear experiences. It's just that the promise of this being a big open world game with lots of things to do and see, the opening feels really botched because it just keeps you strapped to your seat for a really long time before actually taking the harness off and letting you go. However, even when it does that, it's a little confusing trying to determine what this game thinks it is or wants to be. The switch from being linear to freeform, completely open, go wherever you'd like to in the map now, happens so quickly that for a good bit of time I felt kind of aimless. Like, there's big objective markers on the map, but I didn't feel like I had any context as to why I should go to them or if I should go to any specific one before the other. And to circle back to what I was talking about before in regards to combat and the fact that you knew in several hours I'll have unlocked X, Y, Z abilities, as you're exploring this, 2020 video game open world map, which is littered with enemy camps you have to clear and little side objectives, I constantly found myself saying, well, I don't really want to do this yet because I don't have abilities that might make this encounter more fun and more exciting to do. So let's fast forward a little bit to, say, about 10 hours into the game at this point. I've completed the bulk of the story missions on the first section of the island. I'm clearing all the side objectives. I spent a lot of time using photo mode, which I do think is probably the star of this game. Like, it's very complex, has a lot of cool settings you can tweak, and lets you genuinely put together some really great compositions. Sadly, photo mode aside, by this time the already wafer-thin veneer holding the game together had just worn off completely, and I found myself left with this thought of, if I have to do another bloody Fox Den, I am going to throw myself out of my living room window. And then something pretty miraculous happened. I had the thought that I had been waiting to have the entire time when I was playing this game and really struggling to come to grips with it. I remembered, I don't have to play this! And so I found myself meandering my way back to Persona 5 Royal, a game I'd only played a few hours of, but knew that I deeply loved. On top of being an expanded version of an already brilliant game, it fixes just the smallest little gripes I had with the original. What you're seeing right now is the opening title sequence to the game, and if this doesn't sell you on the fact that this is the most bombastically bonkers video game in existence, I don't know what to tell you, but you should probably see a doctor. I think Persona 5 Royal has the potential to have the same cultural footprint that something like Animal Crossing New Horizons did when it came out in late March. For many people, myself included, that game came out at a time when we were all receiving our respective stay-at-home orders, whether it be from work, university, what have you. I'm not going to try and make the radical pull I would need to make to compare Persona 5 or Animal Crossing, nothing like that. But what I will say is that Persona 5 gives you the ability to hang out and just live in this video game Tokyo. You get to just go out to restaurants with your friends, you go to school, you plan activities to do after school in your free time and around part-time jobs. That's on top of what I would say is an exciting, albeit extremely anime storyline. While it doesn't feature a traditional massive open world similar to games like Ghost of Tsushima, it features this really dense and meticulously crafted version of Tokyo that's just a joy to explore. Ghost of Tsushima's more traditional run-of-the-mill side quests make Persona 5 Royal's confidant quests or their sort of social, expanded storylines feel Shakespearean by comparison. This is a video game where you can go from taking a giant burger eating challenge one moment to doing this the next.
Ultimate power! For you, Panther! How sweet! It's just what I needed! How's that? Ha! Get a load of this! Perfect!
Yeah, it's a pretty good video game. While this is still just an expanded version of a game released back in 2017, I would still put this on my Game of the Year list. I had a massive smile drawn across my face pretty much the entirety of the time I was playing this. If I ever didn't, it was probably because I was genuinely emotionally invested in something that was happening to these characters that I really cared about. Sadly, all good things must come to an end, and after about 150 hours of game time, I completed literally everything there was to do in Persona 5 Royal. Thankfully, that time did give me a chance to reflect on Ghost of Tsushima and develop some new thoughts on that game as well. What I realized was that Ghost of Tsushima was to generic, run-of-the-mill, open-world, checklist-style video games what Persona 5 Royal was to good video games, in that Ghost of Tsushima is one of those open-world, generic checklist video games, whereas Persona 5 Royal is a good video game. Yeah, I don't know, I might finish Ghost of Tsushima one day, maybe. Until then, 5 out of 10.